So let's take those questions forward on this 50th anniversary of the emergency with two guests, senior journalists who were both student activists in a way in 1975. I'm joined by Prabhu Chawla, editorial director now at the New Indian Express, but at the time was ABVP's vice president here in New Delhi, and Dr. Sanjay Baru, who was at JNU at the time. Remember, he since went on to become an author, editor, and also was press secretary to the former Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh. Appreciate both of you joining us. I want both of you to tell me, do you believe 50 years later, how do you see the emergency? A dark day for Indian democracy is how you see it, Sanjay Baru, or do you believe that 50 years later, the darkness has been lifted?
Well, I think certainly it was a dark day for Indian democracy. I don't think anybody would dispute that. I think the fact is that we are also now living through difficult times as far as Indian democracy is concerned. So one could say that, from those dark days, we came into the sunshine of the post-emergency period, especially from 1980 till 2014. We had a long period of genuine freedom in this country. And I think in the last 10 years, particularly, we have seen a certain restriction of those freedoms. But one thing I would like to add, Rajdeep, if you go back to that period, it was certainly a dark period. I mean, the kind of restrictions on press freedom, the restrictions on, all other kinds of organization, political activity, etc. I mean, unheard of. But I think what very few people these days appreciate is the kind of context within which a lot of this happened. There was certainly great concern in India about what was happening around in the world. In some ways, it's a parallel to what's happening today. Don't forget that Salvador Allende was assassinated. Several Latin American leaders were assassinated. In Iran, there was a coup. The Shah was brought in. So it was a period in which the West was trying to stage what these days we call color revolutions, but those are essentially regime changes all over the world. And I think when we read now a lot of the writings of that period, it's clear that there was enormous nervousness in the political leadership, which we should not forget. But certainly it was the dark days.
And nervousness in the political leadership doesn't justify the suspension of constitutional rights or the clampdown on media freedom. I'm going to come back to some of the things you've said, Dr. Baru, in a moment, but I want to bring in Prabhu Chawla. Dr. Baru is trying to give a context to the emergency. He's also in some ways suggesting that even today, there are remnants of the emergency, particularly, let's say, in the clampdown, he seems to believe, on media freedoms and other freedoms. There are others who say you cannot compare what happened in 1975 with today. That was, at the end of the day, journalists being thrown into jail. You spent a day in a police lockup. Very different to the situation today? Or are we going to now call today undeclared emergency, as the Congress is calling it, and a declared emergency by Indira? Your memories, Prabhu.
I would like to disconnect present from the past, and I would not like to have an irrelevant context to put to the emergency, which Dr. Baru is trying to put. He's trying to say what was happening around the world was happening in India because of that. I totally disagree. It wasn't a dark day. It was the darkest possible day in the Indian democracy. Worse could not have happened so far. It never happened again, it seems. So I would say it was the darkest period of Indian democracy in which people were picked up from home in the midnight. Leaders were, the preparation was going well ahead of it. Because how can in one day you can arrest everybody, whosoever, wherever he was there? It was they were tracking all the leaders, whether Atal Bihari Vajpayee was in Bangalore or the one who was somewhere else. They had the addresses, they had everything in right. So it means preparation for the emergency was much ahead of when the day it was imposed. Everybody was arrested in one day. Everybody was picked up from newspaper was locked up in one day. Bureaucracy was shifted in the same day. So I would say the emergency was imposed after a proper planning at the level of the Prime Minister's office. So it was the darkest day in which the Prime Minister's office was misused, which was never have been done. It was possible. So I would like to put in my way, the way I will tell you. Because that day, I attended the Jayaprakash rally in Ram Lila ground. Arun Jaitley, who was then the Vice President of the Delhi University Student Union, he was with me. I went to his house on that day. I drove him on my scooter to his house. In the night, police came to my house in Jamuna Par where I was staying. He did not come to our Jetli's house. In the morning when we went to the university, I took him to the university because we were protesting. We got a message, we have to protest against Mrs. Gandhi. We went to the university. And Jetli was leading the delegation. He was protesting with along 100 other students, including Vijay Goyal. And I was sitting on the scooter, and the police came. He tried to run away, but I drove the scooter away. He became the most prominent minister in the government of India. I became editor of India Today. So that's the history, but the way it has happened.
So you're saying it was planned?
In some Paharganj area, and my wife was.
You're saying it was
very much
completely
planned. How can you pick up everybody in the midnight time?
Right. So, Sanjay Baru, when you hear that from Prabhu Chawla, the fact is, therefore, that Indira Gandhi, at least in that period, will be seen as a dictator. There are those who today are asking, was she Durga? Was she a dictator? Was she a Democrat? Was she a bit of all three? But in that period, the manner in which she acted, whatever the context, surely positions herself as the dictator of India in 1975.
No, I don't disagree with Prabhu. Actually, I agree. I did say it was the darkest chapter. But I think in looking back at the past, given that we are 50 years behind us, one must, also understand the context. And secondly, one must also understand what is happening around today, because that was a period in which the democracy was being challenged in much more brutal and direct ways.
No, but Dr. Baru, when you say we must understand what is happening today, a program like this, where I'm asking you these questions, could not have been done between 1975 June and January 1977. There are still people who may question this government.
I completely agree with that. But Rajdeep, I think, to look at that period in purely black and white terms, and look at what is happening today without understanding the nuances. I mean, after all, we have experience of the emergency. You don't repeat the same methodology a second time. But there are various ways in which people feel constrained.
No, so what is the similarity? What is the similarity and what is the big difference?
Well, the number of people who are incarcerated without trial, number of people who are still in jail without trial, the number of people who are picked up and stayed in jail and released after months, like Sudha Bharadwaj, who was living on JNU campus when we were students. So you see a lot of this happening, and I think there are serious challenges today to democracy. This does not in any way belittle the fact that the emergency was the darkest chapter. But I think the lesson we learn from the emergency today, 50 years later, is to understand what are the ways in which our freedoms are being challenged and defend those freedoms. I think we are a proud democracy. We've always been a proud democracy. And I think the emergency taught us ways in which we should defend our freedoms. But I don't see that kind of mobilization for freedom. I mean, I can tell you, forget about June 1975. Think about the months afterwards. And when emergency was lifted, I mean, there was a festival across the country. We burned crackers on the day emergency was lifted. And after that, there's a flowering of Indian media. The number of new newspapers and magazines that were launched. Journalism came into its own. Journalism as a profession really flowered after 79.
Yeah, so that's an interesting observation, because India Today itself was born in those emergency years, and some of the finest reporting done by India Today was post-emergency. I recall particularly through the late 70s and the 80s. But Prabhu Chawla, the same question I pushed to Dr. Baru, because Indira Gandhi remains a polarizing figure. For some, she's still seen through the prism of Durga and Bangladesh. To others, she's seen through the prism of emergency and dictator, and the person who lifted the emergency in 1977 on her own volition in a way. How do you see her? Durga, dictator, Democrat?
You want to say, Rajdeep, her democratic credential, which we all of us are trying to justify. The question is imposing emergencies and becoming a Durga. That Durga doesn't entitle her to impose an emergency and take away rights of the people. What had happened in India at that time, if you use the name of the Durga that you won some war and you divided Pakistan, that's okay. It was a great victory for us. We must appreciate Indira Gandhi in that way. But that doesn't give her the right, because she was unseated by a judicial order. And what Sanjay Baru is saying, but I agree with you, what is happening today, that a lot of people are being put behind the bar. But there was no judicial access available during the emergency. All the arrests were made which were not available. Misa was made that nobody can be released. Now Sudha Bardwaj can be released through the judicial process. So there is no ban on the judiciary not to release the people. The question is what is happening today may not be acceptable to most of us. Yeah, the way it is being done. But there is a judicial intervention here at this point in time.
But as a senior journalist, how do you as a senior journalist, Prabhu, how do you compare what happened where journalists, the likes of Kuldeep Nair, were, for example, put behind bars, the electricity supply was switched off in an Indian Express, censorship was put in place, with what's happening today? Many believe today the official media, whether it's Doordarshan or All India Radio, have also become a handmaiden of the government of the day. There's constant promotion. So, do you see the media today freer?
Rajdeep, the way you have put the example of Doordarshan and media, you have not put any other private organization which has been put in like Indian Express.
I am saving them their blushes. I am saving those. Those private organizations their blushes.
Let me Rajdeep, you allow me to. Rajdeep, you allow me to complete because you allowed Sanjay Baru without interruption. Interruption without allowing me to do. Because what is happening today, I don't think anybody is forcing anybody to write this thing or not write this thing. If the editors and the owner decide to do what they think is being imposed, that is their fault. If somebody, I am not being told not to write anything, I write what I want to write. The question is, fear is among created by ourselves. There may be some vindictive action, I know that. But the question is, if you are afraid of people, you are afraid of writing, okay, you want to curry favor with somebody, there is some kind of a transactional relationship between the media and the government. If you want to maintain transactional relationship, then you are sacrificing your own freedom. Emergency, there was no such kind of thing. There were only people were arrested. Whatever was done, it was done openly. Press was closed and arrested journalists were arrested. Now journalists are not being arrested. They are arrested being on different things. They are putting social media, both sides is happening. In Karnataka, Congress government arrests some journalists. In BJP government is somewhere else. But there is no such kind of imposition the way it was happening during the emergency. Now journalists are themselves, as they say, as Advani said, they were asked to bend and they started crawling on that. It is happening now. Nobody been asking to do anything.
So why do you think? We are doing
so why do you think we have to blame ourselves if we are not performing our duty?
So why do you think Prabhu Indira did what she did, clamped down on emergency, and why do you think then she eventually lifted the emergency in '77?
Because she knew that there would have been a revolution in the streets if she had not lifted. Because the kind of, you see, Nasbandi happened during that day, during that period. That was the maximum primary reason for being thrown out. And there was an inbuilt mechanism. The Congress party at that point in time, there were very famous leaders like Chandrasekhar and everybody else. There was a stronger Congress leadership at the second level. They were protesting. She would have been thrown out of the party if she had not lifted the democracy. Jagjeev left after that. Baguna left after that. There were many congressmen who left. Congress party split during Mrs. Gandhi's time, twice. The Congress party was splitting. They were not standing with her. If she had not won the 71 bar, she would have been thrown out of the party. The question is, she misused the power. As Pranab Mukherjee told me, an Indian constitution, it's a democratic constitution, but it gives the dictatorial powers to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister can do anything under the sun using the same constitution. And she used the same constitution to impose emergency, deprive all of us all liberties. So this is a constitutional provision which she misused to the best of knowledge. That's the problem. Our constitution is much more democratic, but it provides unfettered power to the Prime Minister.
There you make a good point, abuse and misuse of power. In a way, Indira Gandhi, in a way, represented at that moment what happens when so much power is concentrated around one person, and dare one say an extra constitutional authority like Sanjay Gandhi. But Sanjay Baru, therefore, do we see Indira Gandhi through the prism of being seen as a dictatorial leader or a democrat? Some believe she set this political playbook that many other chief ministers and dare one say prime ministers have followed, that once we are in power, we will misuse, abuse power, including agency power, to intimidate rivals and opponents. And therefore, she set the political template for the future.
Of course, that I agree. I mean, she set the political template for growing authoritarianism, democratic authoritarianism, the misuse of parliamentary majorities, legislative majority by successive, chief ministers across the country and some prime ministers later on. I think the fundamental difference, Rajdeep, as I keep thinking about the emergency, is that during the emergency, there was no elite support for the emergency. There was no widespread elite support for the emergency. Today, you find widespread elite support for the kind of authoritarianism that several chief ministers and people in Delhi are using through the institutions of what you call Godi media or controlled media, the corporatization of media, the dominance of corporate interests. I mean, forget about Delhi and forget about the national media. Look at what is happening across the country in Indian language media. Almost nowhere do you have powerful editors, even in the national media.
No,
How
so
many
should
have-
we blame Indira Gandhi for that, or should we blame the fact, as Prabhu says, editors and owners possibly for that? Why blame Indira Gandhi? If
I'm not
editors have
blaming
lost
Indira
their
Gandhi.
spine, why should Indira Gandhi be blamed for it?
No. All I'm saying is that the model of control or authoritarianism has changed.
Right.
That's the point I'm making. That
Right.
it was done starkly, nakedly, bureaucratically, inefficiently in many ways in 1975. I think the ruling elite have
Right.
understood how to do it in a more sophisticated way.
Okay, for one final minute, therefore, Prabhu Chawla, undeclared emergency today, declared emergency in 75 is what Dr. Baru is somewhere hinting at without saying it in so many words. But you want to quickly respond, your final word.
He is entitled. Rajdeep is entitled to his own opinion. I won't say undeclared emergency. I will say the psychophancy is unleashed by everybody. It is psychophancy of the world happening here. If our editors and the media and industrialists start speaking the same language, every politician would like to dictate the term. It is for us, media people, it is for us, the intellectual, to accept or reject it. If you are accepting it, why blame the leader? I don't understand. Ultimately, we have to blame ourselves that we can't stand up to the establishment and ask question whether it's the Congress government, whether it's the BJP government. Can anybody ask a question in Andhra Pradesh or in Tamil Nadu or in West Bengal? No.
Right.
Why are you blaming one central leadership?
Okay.
Every state government leadership is dictatorial in mind. They want to dictate the terms, and unfortunately, we are accepting it without limitations. That's our fault.
I think very well put. Remember, famously, L.K. Advani said at the time, when journalists were asked to bend, they ended up crawling.
Yeah, I said that.
And you could then perhaps argue that maybe there are journalists today who don't just crawl but do the Sakshtang Namaskar. But why blame the leaders for that? Maybe we need to look inwards. But clearly at the end of the day, what Indira Gandhi did in 1975, in my view, was unconstitutional, unacceptable and unjust. And it set a very dangerous template which hopefully we will find citizenry and indeed media persons and anyone interested in democracy being willing to push back against. Prabhu Chawla, Sanjay Baru for joining me on the show tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you.